Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to the Cricket Club podcast. Joined as always by my co-presenter, Chris Vernon. Morning, Chris. Afternoon.
Morning, all. Morning, Carl. Morning, Matt.
And delighted, absolutely delighted. We've had some great guests on so far. Playing guests, still playing international cricket and franchise cricket. We've had some great chats over the last few weeks, and we had Rihanna McDonald-Gay playing for England ladies on last week, which was a great hour. And today we're joined by an old mate of mine, very good mate of mine from a long time ago, too long to mention. Matt Rawnsley, former Worcestershire cricketer and Worcestershire CEO, now recently taken on the job of Hong Kong Football Club general manager, and in between those times had a very successful few years at the Edgbaston Priory Club in Birmingham. So absolutely delighted that Matt's agreed to join us from Hong Kong to have a chat about cricket. Obviously, we'll chat about the England Champions Trophy, recent escapades. We'll talk about the 100-ball franchise windfall, and ask Matt some questions around his time in cricket administration, which is going to be very insightful, because obviously at the moment we've got the fallout of that 100-ball franchise windfall, where the 49% or the 100% were sold off around the world, and that tournament is taking shape quickly with some unbelievably top-level international cricketers coming over. I saw yesterday that David Warner was announced for the London Spirit, and Steve Smith's going to the Welsh Fire, and that tournament seems to be increasing in global popularity as we go. Lots of detractors. It's probably a polarizing tournament, I suppose. We'll get Matt's opinion on the 100 as we go on. But thanks for joining, Matt. Really, really great to have you on. Talk about cricket. We said off air the three. This is hosted by two nobodies, but we're grateful that you're adding to the prestige by coming on.
Being another nobody.
Not at all. Just a quick word for our sponsors: Phantom Cricket, Kentish Mortgage Company, and Savills, without whom we couldn't do the podcast. Huge thanks to you guys for sponsoring the podcast, helping us get some good guests on that will hopefully produce some entertaining hours with great cricketing legends from around the world. So let's dive into it, Matt. How are you, matey?
I'm good, thanks, mate. Yeah. Been out here for a few weeks now, starting my new job, but still keeping an eye on sort of past worlds, really, particularly in cricket. And obviously in recent news, this windfall that's come the game's way with the sale of some 100 franchises kind of takes me back actually to the first meeting that we had at Lords. And I remember coming back on the train from Lords back to Worcester, and it was pitched to the first class counties at that time that they were going to launch this new franchise. So I was there right at the start. Not to say that I was part of the concept, because it came from the ECB, but I think this was at a time really in the game where the ECB was seeing global franchises being a real success. Obviously IPL, then the Big Bash, and sort of traditional domestic cricket in England and Wales was really under pressure. Dwindling attendances at county matches, which is probably not too different now. But then you had this obviously big tournament that was the existing sort of T20 tournament in the UK, and which was a very regional sort of county kind of thing. So I think what the ECB wanted to do was come up with another product that you could scale and potentially in the future sell, because it has global reach and global value, and that's come to fruition. So, I think it's a very positive thing for the game that you've got this enormous amount of money that's coming into it. I think the real challenge now is what happens to that. And I think, I recently sort of said in a reply on a LinkedIn sort of post that it's like, the grandparents have died and the inheritance has come down to the parents, who are the first class game, because that's the structure of first class cricket in the UK, that the first class counties, the chairs effectively own the game. Whatever money is coming into it goes to the first class counties sort of first, and then down to the boards within the recreational game. So as long as the parents look after that inheritance and put it in trust for the kids, which is probably the recreational and the grassroots game for the future, I think it'll be amazing. But I suspect that's not going to happen to the amount that probably the game needs or wants. So I think the ECB has got to be really, really careful about sort of what happens next.
Matt, when you said you were sort of at the table initially when the idea was bounded about, what was, obviously you get lots of different, but as someone at the table at the time, what was the initial thoughts on it? Was it Jesus, this is a bit silly, or this could be really exciting? What was the general sort of consensus within Worcester or other counties as a whole?
Well, I think it came really from lots of different areas. I think one was the original concept that cricket for young people is quite difficult to understand. In a world where sport is quite simple, you're either winning or you're losing. If it's football, it's obviously you can be drawing, but if in football, it's quite easy to be 1-0 up, 2-0 up. So it's, as part of the game of basketball, football, American football, it's very easy at a point in the game to say who's winning. In cricket, as you know, it's very difficult to say that, right? And I'm sure that many people have been frustrated with people that don't know cricket, sitting in the pub or sitting at home and, someone coming up to you, whether it's your girlfriend or your mom or a mate or whatever, saying, who's winning, right? And it's like, well, that's not how cricket works. So I think one of the original concepts was to show and demonstrate in a very easy way of whether you're ahead or behind the game. So if you make it more decimal, where you're not talking about overs, but you're talking about 100 balls, and you're 100 balls in, it's very easy to kind of see off 30 balls you've got this, and then obviously in the second innings you're either ahead of that rate or you're behind that rate, and you need to catch up, and it's very easy to understand how far behind you are or how far ahead you are. So I think that is something that resonated well with all of us, as far as counties, like how do we get more young people involved in the game? How do we interact and engage people that don't really understand cricket? Because cricket's not happening in schools like it used to be when I was younger. It's not happening. It's basically the responsibility of county boards and clubs, right, to sort of go into schools and colleges and whatever. So and again, trying to get a new format that was getting people like the BBC and Sky excited in getting it back onto mainstream TV. That was also another a real positive. Like, if this is going to be on the BBC again, that's amazing, right? That's exactly what we wanted. So I think you had to come up with something that was different to be able to enable that. So I think the initial sort of view in the room was, okay, this is quite exciting. We're not really sure how this is going to sort of develop. There's going to be some purists in the game that say, no, an over is 6 balls, and how's that going to work? And it's sort of like, fantasy cricket for a PlayStation and Nintendo generation. What are we doing? So, my answer to that at the time was, well, if you still want that, you've still got it. You're still playing 50 over cricket. You're still playing 20 over cricket. You're still playing 4-day cricket. We're still playing test match cricket, So, this is not replacing anything. It might devalue some of those other formats, which I think it probably has with 50 over cricket. But I think it was always going to try and be supplementary and add something to the calendar. And obviously the pushback has been, it's probably being played now in a time of the year where it demands a lot of people's, time, and it's probably becoming a priority over other formats, and the challenges of playing 4-day cricket at the start of the season and an end of the season where, it becomes either seamer friendly or batter friendly, because you just roll in the hell out of a wicket to try and to make sure you don't get a game over in 2 days. That's all the challenges that have come as really of this new format.
When you went to that meeting, Matt, and just to remind everyone or people that are just joining, that Matt was a CEO of Worcestershire County Cricket Club in the UK, a first class county, which I think it's fair to say is a smaller county. Matt, as a CEO,
Yep.
Monetary and size wise, it's probably one of the smaller counties. When you went to the meeting and the 100 ball was floated, knowing that you weren't going to be a host venue, how did you? I don't know what you did. You might have been positive or negative, but let's say, knowing you probably were in favour of it because the game would have benefited as a whole. But from a Worcestershire point of view, Chris and I live in Kent, and Kent is probably in the same boat as a smaller county, a more rural county, and not going to be a host. How did those CEOs and chairmen get behind it or not get behind it because they weren't going to benefit directly from seat sales or merchandise sales or gate receipts or whatever they might have had? How did you feel about it at the time?
Well, the original concept was that in 100 matches, the men would play at the first class venues. So in our example, men would play at Edgbaston and the women would play at Worcester. So that was the original concept, and that was how it was going to be across the country. So the Derbyshires, the Northants, the Kents, they would get the Somersets would get basically the female side of the franchises. Sorry, the Somerset would be the men, but so that was the original concept, and then obviously that changed. I think in the first year, from memory, there was some of that, and then it was like, well, actually, it's better if people are coming for a whole day in one venue, watching women's cricket first, and then they kind of stay on and watch the men's game because of sort of the operational expenses. You get better economies of scale. So I kind of get that. But the philosophy was that it's not about yes, I know there's gate receipts that go to those other venues, but there was still a share of that pot that was going across all of the first class counties. So actually, if you look at it, from a cold-hearted point of view, from a Worcestershire perspective, it's like, well, look, we've got 8,500, 9,000 seater capacity. Are we really the right sort of venue to host that? If you want to really make it a success, or you go up the road 25 miles and you can get 25,000 people in at Edgbaston, it kind of makes sense to be there. But as long as we're getting our share when the money is distributed, then fair enough. So we were at the table, and I was with Neil Snowball at that time, who was CEO at Warwickshire. So we looked at the names were decided basically at that time, but we looked at kit choices, and we employed the head sort of coach together. We went through a lot of the sort of team picks together and these sorts of things. So every first class county was sort of at the table at the creative bit as this sort of started to get off the ground. And then now, of course, I think there's, as you look back, probably some of those first class counties probably did better out of it than maybe they originally thought they were going to, and there was probably a slight change in that sort of business financial distribution model. But now I think it seems pretty equitable as far as the fall through to those counties that have come from the sale. I think, I don't know the exact numbers, but everyone is going to get kind of their fair share, sort of a 1/18 share of that dividend, if you like, right? And that means a huge amount to a county like a Worcestershire or a Northants or Derby as a proportion of your total annual income versus what it would mean to say, a Warwickshire or a Lancashire, right? Or a Surrey, for sure. But I think those first class counties certainly saw this is a great opportunity for us. They're often called the test match grounds, aren't they? The Surreys and the Lancs of the world and Warwickshires, that this is our time to kind of shine. Let's put on a really good show. It kind of secures our future as there's debate about, who gets a test match and who gets a one-dayer, because obviously now, there used to be less test match sort of venues in the UK. There's more now with sort of Southampton coming online, Durham, etc., who built stadiums to sort of support cricket, and Cardiff as well. And obviously they're probably not getting the share of international cricket that they want. So I think everybody is probably happy. But as I sort of said in that LinkedIn sort of reply, I think what the game can't do is, which is what probably happened in rugby, the players will want their share of this, right? There's absolutely no doubt about that. They'll know what money's kind of going to these different counties. I'm sure the PCA are only doing their job to make sure that their players are getting the fair share. But over the period of the next sort of couple of years, you could see this sort of hyperinflation in operational expenditure of the game. What was a contract for the 100, you're probably looking now, obviously that's only going to go up, and it's going to go up again, and it's going to go up again. And then that also the knock-on effect of, what that means for first-class counties and players paying more in general, players wanting to not play red ball cricket and just go white ball cricket, but then probably now being paid just for white ball cricket what they were being paid for a total contract maybe 5 years ago. So if the game is not careful, that when this money runs out, which it will at some stage, right, you'll have an operational expense of the game that is potentially not sustainable for some of these smaller counties if they don't use this money really, really wisely. You're really cautious about sort of vanity capital expenditure projects. We're going to build a new stand, we're going to build a new indoor centre, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and actually what is a sustainable model behind that? And I think that's always been a critical question really for cricket in the UK, whereas you compare it to South Africa or Australia, where it's less first class teams, there's more competition, they play less games, so you've got to perform, and that's always been an argument within Australia and English cricket, that us Poms with soft and we've got too many chances, and you can have a run of 4 or 5 noughts and you're still getting picked. And I think that's going to continue to be a challenge. But this investment that's coming now through basically masks that, and it will mean that the current first class structure will stay almost indefinitely at this stage, because the finances enable the counties to survive, and they will survive. That covers their costs for the next sort of several years. So it doesn't really change the structure of the game too much, which again, is that the right thing, right? Is that the right thing for the game in general, that you carry on for, in 20 years time, we've still got the same amount of counties, and we're still questioning whether it's the right model. As an ex-CEO of Worcestershire, of course, and a player of Worcester, I love Worcester, and I think we're as competitive on the field as anybody can be, at any particular time. It's about it's about your performance level, isn't it? Not necessarily how many seats that you've got in your stadium. And when I was CEO at Worcester, I remember kind of standing up in, I think, my second season as there, and I said, look, guys, our objective really as a first class county is to put England caps on your heads. That's our objective. As a byproduct of that, we'll win. If we're doing that, if our strategy is to make the next generation of England cricketers, as a byproduct of that, we will win matches and we'll put silverware in the cupboard and we'll have a great youth program. If our objective is just to win, then we can do that this year. But what's the sustainability of that? So I do hope that other counties see it the same way. Because I think some of the smaller counties have a fantastic role to play in the regions that they support. Worcestershire's got Herefordshire around it, again, as you know, Carl, great sort of cricketing passion that survives in that region. So if a club like Worcestershire fails, what is that pathway from recreation through to minor county, through to first class county and professional cricket? I think that is a model that is very, very important. So hopefully everybody just gets stronger and more sustainable. But I fear that might not be the case.
And taking your Worcester hat off for a second, which I appreciate is difficult, do you think that the chat around the limiting or reducing the number of first class counties and going to more like the Sheffield Shield, having like 6 or 7, do you think that's potentially a better way to improve the standard of first class cricket? I know that probably means someone like Worcester might drop out, but taking that aside, do you think there's merit in that, or do you think that it's a better being what it is and just managing it and trying to structure it better?
Well, I think if you think really long term about it, we've got a big population in the UK. So if you you think, well, if you need more first class teams because we've got a higher population, right? That's not a bad mentality to have. I think if you think about it the other way, if you think about it cynically, and I know this is something that Bob Willis always used to say. We've got like 450 professional cricketers in England, and probably 150 of them are only ever going to be good enough to play sort of Test cricket. So what about the rest, right? Mm-hmm. So I think in general, the standard of cricket in the UK is probably sustained. I don't think it's necessarily getting any better, and I don't think you can't blame coaches for that. You can't blame players for that. You could question the format and the amount of cricket that people play. You could question the facilities and the time that sort of matches are played. I don't think we really prepare our cricket as well for Test match cricket now because of when you're playing first class 4-day cricket at the start of the season and at the end. I think if you went straight to if you cut 2/3 of the counties, for example, which is effectively, you could argue, what the 100 has done, right? But you've just accepted a lot more overseas players. I've no doubt at all that those English players, Welsh players that are playing in the 100 have developed their game, being around people that are at the top of their game at an international level. And I think that's what sport does, right? We've all played, I'm sure, in different sports, not just cricket, but you want to play around people that are definitely as good as you, but hopefully, better than you, because you rise to their level, you rise to their standard, you play better because they're better. So we need to be playing more cricket, really, that drives us forward, and you're in a side and people are around you and they're bringing you up to their standard, and I think the 100 does that. I think also the existing T20 domestic competition could have done that if you sort of played it at a different time of year, and also probably brought a few more overseas players in, right? Because I think that's just good for the game, it's good for the spectators. So obviously there was a choice that was made. Do we invest in the T20 as it is, the domestic product, or do we make something else? And you could argue that now the 100 was the right decision because of the financial implications and the windfall that it's provided. But for the standard of the basic domestic game, I'm not sure it's been that good.
Do you think? I think first class cricket might improve with the Sheffield Shield style format, but do you think if counties such as the Worcesters or the Derbys if they were to be cut, for example, if that was the case, do you think that then the pathways coming through for kids would then be reduced? Carl and I obviously know Kent set up quite well, and those counties as a county have a responsibility to then bring kids through their pathways. Do you think if those counties were to be left behind, do you think then the junior setup would then be affected, or do you still think they would have the progression through the youth stuff as well?
Well, I think, I can't envisage a future where those, the first class counties or the structure as it is going to change, right? Because of the mechanism of the governance of the game. You're basically having to then get first class county chairman to it's like turkeys voting for Christmas. They're not going to do it. What is going to happen is that there's going to be sort of a natural competitive environment that makes some of the bigger counties performance higher, and their ability to pay players more means that you'll drag players that are coming through the pathways of a Kent or a Worcestershire or a Northants or a Derbyshire, and they'll migrate to the Surreys and the Warwickshires and the Lancashires, and that's not unique, right? I mean, that's always sort of been there, and the ECB have tried to do what they can around sort of caps for salaries and payrolls and these sorts of things, and putting structures in place. Also, as a first class county, Worcestershire would be rewarded if one of their pathway players went within a certain amount of time to another county. So I think there's mechanisms there to ease that the pain, if you like, of creating a player and giving them an opportunity and then moving somewhere else. But I think there is a natural kind of competitive landscape that players want to play in bigger arenas. They want to play in environments where there's more resources, there's better physios, there's better nutrition, there's better food, there's more things that are available to them, sponsorship opportunities and these sorts of things. So it's historically, in recent years, it's the larger counties that have been able to provide opportunities like that. And the larger counties as well that have now gone into links with IPL franchises and different things around the world that give them those players opportunities to go and play through that network.
We've got a question on Instagram for you, Matt, and from AP Jurathki. And this has been a thing we've obviously spoken about a little bit anyway, but he said, it's any chance of getting Test cricket and first-class cricket back on the terrestrial TV? Is that something that's ever been discussed at board level? Or I know obviously that there's an occasional first-class game, but nothing really in terms of the 4 or 5 day stuff really on terrestrial telly. Do you think that would be a good thing, or do you think it just comes down to the money side of things?
Unfortunately, I think it does come down to the money a bit. I think for the game, definitely, having any sport on terrestrial TV, is a real opener. It's probably less of an issue now, perhaps, than it was, say, 10 years ago. I think, most households now don't just have terrestrial TV, and, even Sky, for example, are losing some sports to Now TV or BT or whatever. It's just kind of whatever subscription that you've got now. It seems like you don't get the whole package, right? It's just kind of spread across, Amazon for tennis and different things. So, I think that ironically kind of supports going back to terrestrial TV, because you're having to pay lots of different franchise subscriptions, and you're not still getting the full package. So if Test cricket was on BBC, for example, I think that would be fantastic for the game. But again, it's up to BBC then to be able to be competitive in that environment, which I just don't think they would be, and probably can't.
Some of the money from the 100 franchise could be used. I mean, this is probably not even relevant, but I saw recently that Live Golf have bought out the rights for ITV or BBC, so they're going to have pretty much their entire stuff on free-to-air telly this year, which is going to be fantastic, really, isn't it? And probably in terms of bringing the game of golf up. But if some of the money used from the 100, 25 million came in, could some of that be siphoned off and say for the next 3 years, we're going to have one test match on terrestrial telly? That could be something that money could be used for, to try and bring the game up. And it might be that the Live Golf, I know that obviously the money behind it's ridiculous, but that could see as a big thing for golf in this country. All of a sudden, if people are watching it and enjoying it, then it could be a big lift, and that might be the same for cricket.
Yeah, I think there's not a finite amount there, is there? I suppose so. I suppose obviously not there in that commercial conversation at that board level, but that would come down to a choice, wouldn't it? It's either we're subsidising something to get it onto terrestrial TV, and if we are, it means that we can't use that money for something else. So you'd like to think that it's not the first class county saying no, we want as much as we can get. But in that situation, it's probably the recreational game that would be at a loss there, right? It's either we think this is good for the recreational game to have it on TV because it's more people that are likely to watch it, and hopefully they want to sort of play cricket and join a local club, versus giving them directly that money to go and do that themselves. So it's a choice, I think, and I think it probably will be an element of, right, we're going to show a one day, or we're going to show one test match. But again, I think if you're going to do something like that, you've got to be all in. You've got to be thinking, right, we're going to show the next Ashes that are England based, and we're going to show the whole series on terrestrial. I think that's really how sport thrives when you create heroes, doesn't it, at a national kind of level. And we saw that in 2005. People really get behind it. You want people going in to work on a Monday morning or a Tuesday morning after a test match and saying, did you see that yesterday? I've never really watched TV cricket before, but I watched it. It was amazing. And it went right down to the sort of the final hour, and I couldn't believe it. That's what you want. That's what you want, that accessibility to that kind of spectacle.
Yeah.
Going back to the Matt, to the money that's involved. The figures are, and the ECB chief exec, and I'll come on to this again in a little bit, going back to when it first was launched, about the hopes for the 100, according to the ECB, because it's documented. But when the franchises were put up for sale earlier this year, the ECB valued the whole thing at 300 million. And after the auction, the value is now £1 billion, due to the fact that the franchises were sold and the ECB have taken in £500 million. The recreational game is guaranteed out of that to get 50 million quid. The recreational game in your LinkedIn post, you're talking about what the recreational game might get or might not get to sustain itself. I've got no idea how much of a drop in the ocean 50 million is for the recreational game. It might be 10 years worth of support for the recreational game, but 50 million quid is guaranteed to the recreational game. That's point one, been agreed by the ECB. Point two, going back to your CEO days of Worcestershire, and there's sub questions to this. Non-host counties are going to receive factually between 20 and 25 million quid out of the 500 that's been taken in. So I'm assuming that the 25 million quid to Worcestershire is going to be very welcome, first and foremost. Whether Worcestershire board now have always been supportive or not is irrelevant, really. They're going to get 20 million, 25 million quid. When you're thinking about your reply the other day and what they should do with it, how does 25 million quid drop into the overall running of a smaller county first class club? I imagine it's world changing, but is 25 million quid a change for Worcester?
Yeah, it is. I mean, again, I don't know the figures up to date, but turnover on an annual basis was around about sort of 6-7 million, and you're running pretty much at a break even, right? There was debt, so 25 million quid. The first thing that you do probably if you won 25 million quid was pay your mortgage. So you want to write off that debt straight away because again, you're just paying money out in interest that the game loses, right? And that's kind of the way that I would look at it. You'd say, well, try and keep as much money in the game as we possibly can. So you first off you pay off your debt. Then I think, like we were talking about before, it's making sure that, again, this windfall that it will never come again, unless the Phoenix decide to sell the other 51% or a proportion of that, right? So you'd like to think that a significant amount of that money would sort of be put into trust, so it's ring fenced. I'm sure there'll be some capital expenditure, updating facilities. There's lots of leaks at New Road. There's lots of flooding at New Road. There's things that are a cost on an annual basis that if you spent a bit of money now, you'd probably reduce some of your operational cost on a year over year by fixing some things and investing in some things. So I'm sure, Ashley Giles, who's in that chair now, is looking at things like that. But I think if you look, you could go down a spectrum, right, where you say on one end of the spectrum, let's chuck as much in the bank as we can and just sort of earn our interest off that until we really decide at a strategic level what we want to do with this kind of money, right? Because it's a massive responsibility and we don't want to get it wrong. And I think in this initial period, you'd want to pay off your debt, look at some of those low-hanging fruit, things that we wanted to do around the ground or initiatives that we've always wanted to do that we've not been able to fund or support or put a business case together to do it. And then at the other end of the spectrum, it's like, right, Worcestershire, for example, floods 3-4 times, maybe 5 times, even 6 times in a year. Do we want to spend 25 million and borrow another 15 million and move somewhere else? which I think is a real risk, right? If you've got, the amount of first class counties as it is already, what is the sustainable model that is behind that? I think, again, when I was a player back in 2000, 2001, Cecil Duckworth actually got us Glenn McGrath as an overseas player. He paid his wages for the season. Cecil was a fantastic guy, owned Worcester Warriors Rugby Club. And I think at the time, I'm going back now 25 years, but there was probably a moment that actually to have a central hub of sport in Worcester, the way you had, six ways and rugby, you had Worcester City football at that time as well, which now, doesn't exist in the same way that it used to then. And then you had cricket. If you had one great big, great venue just off the M5, it would have been absolutely amazing. And we missed that window. And I'm not saying that, anyone should be to blame for that. But now things are getting worse. The environment's getting worse. It's going to flood more. So I think that's been talked about, moving to another venue, but you've got to be really careful about how sustainable that is. What kind of venue is it going to be? Is it hospitality? Can you do stuff in the winters? If you're thinking that you're going to get, international cricket in the future, then you're dreaming. It's just not going to happen. So I hope that, they're thinking very, very carefully about what they do with that pot. And also that, if in 10 years' time that money's gone and there's nothing really to sort of show for it, that's not just a failure for Worcestershire, but that's a failure on the ECB as well. There's got to be, really strict governance and due diligence around some of the decisions that are being made at this sort of county level, because there will be, no doubt, some, vanity projects that you kind of question, is that really a good return on investment for the game?
I was going to ask you... Sorry, Chris. I was just going to. Matt's obviously got my script, because my follow-up question was about Worcestershire moving, because that's obviously a topic, and I wondered if that was how Matt described a vanity project of moving to a new stadium, because Worcestershire, if you read everything, if you believe everything you read, Worcestershire are going to use the money to move away from New Road because of the flooding and yada yada yada. So. Is that a vanity project with the money to move to a new stadium? And you've actually answered the question now, because you think it's more prudent to stay at New Road and fix the problems and invest in the current stadium, which is a very historic ground in first class cricket. So I'm sure that has a bearing on the decision for members. Do members want to go to a six ways type stadium that's plonked on the side of the M5? And six ways has got its own history, recent history. Brilliant stadium. Warriors had a brilliant run into the Premiership rugby and then went bust. So that isn't a great shining light on the whole topic, is it?
No.
I believe Worcester City Football are playing up there now, or there's plans to play up there and use the stadium of the Phoenix of Worcester Warriors is coming back. Or they've applied to go into the Championship next year, and Worcester City might be playing there, so they might be sharing two of the three Worcester franchises, if you like, or the big sporting organisations might be getting their act together, maybe. But the 25 million quid will have some ring fencing rules around it for sure from the ECB, but I don't know whether the ECB view a new stadium as a great idea. And a brilliant way to use the money. Whereas, what you were saying was maybe let's use this for the next 25 years, 30 years. If we break even or lose a few quid, 25 million quid guarantees Worcestershire for 25, 30 years. And we can pay for some improvements and we can pay for whatever. Is the vanity project that you spoke about, are they new stadiums or marquee international players at absorbent wages? Is that what you're talking about, Matt, in vanity projects?
Yeah, I think there's certain capex things that you could say, well, have they been as successful as they could have been? And I think if stadiums are increasing capacities without a solid model behind that of how they're going to fill them, right, then to me that is a vanity project. the build it and they will come doesn't necessarily work, right? I think, in Worcestershire's perspective, talking relative to them, I think, what Worcestershire doesn't have is an indoor cricket school. That's something that they desperately need, and they need that to be competitive from a player perspective. To sign players, you need indoor training facilities. So that's something that I know was talked about even before I was CEO at Worcester with Worcester Uni. I'm not sure where that is right now. What Worcester doesn't have either is what I would classify as a first-class outground. It uses Kidderminster, great wicket, but it's pretty short, straight boundaries. The changing facilities aren't great, and that's not a criticism of them. It's a great club and it's got great history. But what it could do with is this credible alternative that when it does flood at the start of the season or even mid-season, like it did a few years ago, you've got another venue that you could go to. Warwickshire has Portland Road, which is like their sort of youth academy, centre of excellence, isn't it? So, I would say that would be a good investment for Worcestershire. I can't imagine that. I remember being on Midlands Today, BBC Midlands Today. I'm going back now 7 years ago, and we'd just gone through a flood, and I basically got all the staff together, put out a call to arms to all members, and put something in the Worcester News as well. Come down and help us clean the seats, right? And even got my family down there, and we had sponges and buckets, and we're cleaning the venue. And I think it was Nick Owen at the time asked me, this is obviously getting worse. Can you ever see Worcester playing elsewhere? My instinctive answer was no. It's just such an iconic venue. It's not worth anything. It is literally on a floodplain. It's not like you can sell it or rent it out to anybody or lease it to anybody else. It's actually, partly owned by the cathedral, the diocese in Worcestershire. You've got King's School next door. So, I think to think that you're going to permanently move away from New Road is a bad idea. But to have a credible alternative venue that you could seat, 4, 5, 6,000 people if you wanted to, and you've got maybe an indoor school, a training ground, and you go into a partnership, a joint venture maybe with the University of Worcester, and you look at a venue that you could do that. I think that is a good strategic decision, and that would be money well spent. But moving on your own, to another venue, a greenfield site somewhere in the county or Herefordshire or wherever, and saying, right, we're going to spend 50 million quid and we've got half of it to put down on a new venue, not a good idea.
It's I'm pretty sure I'm correct, Matt. Hope I am. You were the CEO on the Vitality Blast. I'm pretty sure you were. I'm pretty sure I saw you on the outfield as a CEO. So smaller clubs can win these big trophies, can't they? Like, you don't have to spend it all on massive overseas players, because that team at the time won the Blast against all of the big counties, Surrey, all of the Somersets that normally get to finals day. Worcestershire been there twice, I think, in recent years.
Yeah, both on my watch, I have to say, Carl.
Some of the great Worcestershire's a great county. It's got some great history, obviously, going back to some Ian Botham and Basil D'Oliveira and lots of great characters over the years at Worcester. Duncan Fernley. When I started playing cricket, everybody had a Duncan Fernley bat, didn't they? And my hero growing up was Graham Hick, because I went to watch him at New Road, because I'm from Worcester. So New Road has a lot of personal affection for me, because I went to watch and sit there with my scorebook watching Graham Hick, as a kid, and I love New Road as a place, and then Worcestershire have had a lot of good days over the years, but winning the Blast in this modern era must have been high up there, hadn't it, on Worcestershire's honours?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I was a player there, I was a player there for 9 years, and I can't remember us winning much really. I think we kind of there was a Div 2 championship in the 40 over. We got promoted. We kind of came near the top of the table a few times in different things, but we'd come out of an era that was like late 80s, Dilly, Botham, where we were sort of cleaning up in the championship, 88, 89, I think it was. And then sort of it'd been a bit of a lean period, really. Again, at that time, sort of mid 90s, we did really well in the NatWest Trophy. We won it one year. We lost against Warwickshire another year. I think I was 12th man. That was in my first year, 94. So we'd been talked about as one of those teams. And there was this saying that we kind of kept on going around, and it was actually used by our own players, which really annoyed me, which was, we punch above our weight, right? Which is a saying that I hate, because that kind of, there's a sort of a subtle psychology behind that we do better than we actually are, or we do better than our kind of resources allow. So, when I joined as CEO, we'd just come through a really challenging time with the Alex Hepburn case and the things that were sort of happening there. So it was a time really to sort of reset the dressing room and reset values. As I said, we kind of had the conversation with the players. Our role is to get you to play for England, and I'm sure that has always been the case at counties like Worcestershire. But we just had a time really where we had some good players. Mo was obviously a good leader. We had some really talented players around you. Some of those aren't there anymore, unfortunately. Cox, Barnard, Pennington, Pat Brown, all moved on, which is a real shame. So the game goes in cycles, doesn't it? You kind of have these periods, and you look at the sort of, test matches, England, Australia. We were sort of obviously really top of our game in one-day cricket. Not so much the case at the moment. And I think when you're in a leadership role and you can try and do what you can to cultivate an environment where you're breeding leaders and giving them the freedom to express themselves. But really it comes down to confidence. If their confidence is up and they're winning, then they're more likely to win. Winning and losing are habits. And we got into the habit of winning, and we got some really good overseas players. Callum Ferguson was unreal. We had Marty Guptill the following year, who again was just, fantastic to have in an environment like that, particularly around some of the younger players that we had. So, that was part of my job. I was CEO and a director of cricket, really signing players and working with agents to get players online. And, we did well, and then it's up to the players. And once they're out there, they did it. No one else did it. We just try and enable them and give them the tools to be successful. But I'm sure their time will come again. They're now in first division, aren't they? Championship cricket. Everyone thought they were going to get relegated because they lost a load of players and they didn't. So, they're hopefully, they will build again and their time will come again. But it was great to be part of.
It's amazing Kent have had a couple of wins as a smallish club, and Gloucester won last year. Your neighbouring county, won their first T20 for a while. So that was obviously great for them. A couple of questions in the chat. There's loads of questions in the chat, based lots of them around Worcester, which is great. The benefit of a town centre ground like New Road is that people can get there on public transport. People can walk to the ground. People can spend money in the bars rather than out of ground, purpose-built stadiums like Six Ways, if you like, for the Worcester thing, is that people have got to drive there, can't have a drink. When Worcester do all their finances and stuff, Matt, how important is it to have the support of the local people walking to the ground and paying to get in and having a drink and buying a hot dog and sticking around? That's obviously important to Worcester and the smaller counties, I guess.
But it's crucial, right? I mean, it's, particularly when you're a smaller county, you want that local element. You want to make it as easy for people to get to the ground as possible. And, the infrastructure in the UK is not great from a public transport point of view. It's not cheap. And, if you can get a train and it's on time, normally if you think about some of these larger venues, I mean, even Warwickshire, Edgbaston, there's no real local train station. You get off at Five Ways, or you get off at the university, and it's sort of half an hour walk down. It's and then you go into a larger venue. I think something like Worcester, which really it benefits from, is that you're literally 200, 300 meters from the town centre if you're not in it already, so that's great for visiting teams to come to, because you're a 5-minute walk or less from Foregate Street Station, and you walk down a really nice sort of path over the river, which is iconic, and then you're at the ground. We did a lot to try and make it a venue in its own right. Come and watch cricket. That's our purpose. But we tried to make it a destination in its own right, to be really open, inclusive for kids. There's loads of stuff on. There's a climbing wall. There's kind of a festival sort of atmosphere. There's music on between overs and these sorts of things. And we tracked that, of course. You kind of look at who's coming into your ground, what's your footfall, what's the demographics of people that are coming in, what are they spending, how long are they staying here, did they stay all day? So these are the things that counties try and look at. And again, hopefully some of the money that's coming down into the game, particularly to a county like Worcestershire, is to invest in things like that, right? Invest in things that get people to come to a cricket venue and hopefully watch the match. But if they're not watching the match and they're going off around, walking around the ground, there's other things for them to do, right? Things that kind of engage people, because, kids these days, not that they ever could, but kids these days don't want to sit there sometimes and, in a seat and just look at their phone. They want to be off going and doing other things. So you've got to keep them engaged. But it is a crucial part of any P&L of a club is how many people that we're getting and how long they're staying for.
In the chat, Matt, Alistair says that there is discussions ongoing between Worcester University and Worcestershire County Cricket Club about an indoor centre and an off-site centre, and he asks, will Worcestershire invest in this? We don't know the answer. I'm sure you don't know the answer, but it could be positive for the county if this money comes down, enables them to do as you said, which is maybe invest in the infrastructure and the second ground or an indoor centre with Worcester University, which will benefit the next generation, the generation after that, of Worcestershire young players, or wherever they come from in the Midlands or Herefordshire or Shropshire. Lots of Worcestershire players have come from Shropshire, haven't they? In the last few years, you've got a very rich history of taking Shropshire products, Shropshire minor county players, and making them into good first-class professionals. So, Alistair, thanks for the message in the chat. I'm sure that's something that'll come out in due course, whether those chats happen and something comes of it. But hopefully for Worcestershire, it will transpire and something good will come of the money that's coming down. And
I think you said, Carl, the magic word, which is enabler, right? And that's what this money can be. And I think clubs like Worcestershire need to, and I'm sure they are, engaging with the city council, the county council, the university, the major stakeholders really in the city and the county, to sort of say, look, we've got this. We want to have a really strategic view about how we use it. We don't want to work in isolation. We don't want to do something and then someone says to us in 2-3 years' time, well, if I'd have known you were doing that, we'd have had a conversation with you about doing something, on this site ourselves and these sorts of things. So, hopefully those conversations are happening.
Waves in the chat wants to know, Matt, why don't we prepare pitches in England for spinners? Why don't we prepare more pitches, more drier pitches, so that England produces more a more balanced team to go forward into the international tournaments? And I'm guessing, if I may, for those people watching, Matt had a 9-year career, was a left arm spin bowler. So this is a good question for Matt. He would probably have enjoyed bowling on drier pitches at New Road, which we've touched upon is quite difficult at times because of the river. But for those watching, Matt played 100 matches, 46 first class matches, 54 List A matches in his career. Best bowling figures, Matt. Is it? Do you know him? Do you know them?
Was it against Oxford Uni or something? I think. Yeah.
No, I don't know who it was against. 6 for 44 is a first class best.
Oh, okay.
6 for 44, and a 1 day best of 5 for 26.
Not too bad.
It gets better. In this day and age, when stats are the key thing, when everyone looks at stats for franchise cricket and 1 day cricket and strike rates and things. I mean, we're not going to get into your batting strike rate, don't worry. But your career economy rate would be you could sell yourself for a fortune these days, couldn't you? Were you around at the wrong time? You in the wrong era? Like, well, a career first class economy rate of 2.76 and a limited overs economy rate of 4.49. Like, you could sell that, couldn't you, today?
You certainly could. I definitely was in the wrong era. I think, again, you sort of touched on it there. So I think it's back to the question. Look, we're playing first class cricket at the wrong time, right? In the UK now. So you're playing at the start of the season, at the end of the season. You could argue, well, at the end is okay, but you groundsmen have got a real challenge to try and get a good balance between having first class matches last 4 days at the start of the year, which is really hard. And I know that there's been changes to, moving from a Dukes ball to Reader ball and then Dukes and then, proud seam to a flatter seam. And you're trying to get, you want a really good balance, a competitive balance between bat and ball in any first class. You don't want to give either side sort of too much advantage. And same with, on the spinning side, I played, what was it, sort of mid-40s for first class games. I don't know what my stats are as far as how many overs, first innings versus second innings I bowled. I've no idea, but I'd imagine it'd be highly weighted to the second innings because obviously the pitches sort of degrade. But I think
that will be first class spinners in general, right? And even in Test cricket, right? I bet someone like even a Shane Warne or a Muralitharan would have been weighted to that side of things in all forms, right?
But if you've got games that are only lasting 2 to 3 days, that's a problem because spinners don't even get a look in. And then when they do, you're probably playing on quite doctored pitches. And I know, Somerset have got in trouble with that for, a few years with Jack Leach bowling and other spinners. But again, that's probably not a fair contest between bat and ball. And as a spinner, you actually don't want it to turn square. Right, particularly as a left-arm spinner, because you don't want to just bowl balls and it just goes past the bat all day. You want batters to commit and play shots. So again, if you're having to pitch it on the wickets and it's pitching and it's spinning way past it, you want to be attacking the stumps and bowling a line that straightening and you've got all your decisions caught, LBW and bowled in play. So you just want a bit of help, right? You want a bit of help as a spinner. And you want players to try and attack you as well, because that kind of gets you in the game. So it's a really difficult balance. And with the 100 being played when it is now, I'm not sure that's going to change significantly for the next few years.
We've been going for an hour, Matt, which is brilliant, and it's been really, really insightful. We're gonna ask a few questions now based around general stuff rather than keeping it on Worcester and stuff, because we've got a lot of people around the world watching in from India and stuff, all of which want to know about the English perspective on the Champions Trophy debacle, whatever you want to call it. The England women's Ashes getting beaten 16-0. Plenty of questions in the chat about what you think as a player and a CEO, and about the direction of travel for the England team now. There's going to be a review on the women's game and the men's game, and that cycle turns around, as you mentioned a minute ago about cycles. Are we in a cycle now where we're in the doldrums for a while in the white ball? Are we going to, what do you think about the Jos Buttler standing down, and did we take it seriously enough? Did we did we even practice? You know, Peterson said we didn't practice, or Ravi Shastri said, I can't believe the England team didn't practice for the whole series. Like, where do you think the England team is, Matt, as a fan? You know, I'm not saying as an administrator. Where do you think we are as a supporter?
Well, I said before, you know, you're always in a cycle, and you kind of, most of the time you're mid-cycle, and then you're at a peak, and then you're at a trough. And I think, you know, probably where the women's sort of international game is at the moment, from a performance point of view, they've troughed, right? You know, you'd like to think that they're going to plateau there and then work up, right? The only way is up, really, from where they've been. I think the women's game in general, if you look at sort of domestically, it's doing pretty well, right? I think that the standard in women's cricket is getting better and better. So are teams like Australia advancing and improving quicker than we are? And that's kind of highlighting sort of where we're at in the game. If you go to the men's side, again, you know, we're coming off. I was at Lords when we won the World Cup. It was a great day. You know, that was definitely sort of our peak, and we managed to sort of sustain that peak for another season after that. And then it's been a steady sort of degradation really since then. I don't think it's particularly healthy to look too deeply into why you're sort of winning and in the particular case sort of losing. I think, like I said before, winning's a habit and losing's a habit, and I think you kind of need strong people around you to sort of step up and compete when you're not doing particularly well. And the way that England play means that they're probably more vulnerable than most other teams, because they just back themselves regardless really of the consequences, it seems, at some times, and just kind of go out there and think, right, well, we'll just keep believing in ourselves. And, you know, that's exciting to watch, right? You know, and you think, you know, what is the purpose of cricket, right? Is the purpose of cricket to pay players, or is the purpose of cricket to entertain people and inspire people? You know, I believe it's the latter. So, you know, you want people to go out there and play with belief. You want people to go out there and play with confidence. And I think, you know, if you're, I was listening, completely other sport, but, you know, Roger Federer did a great speech. I'm sure you've seen it, where, you know, he talks about winning and losing, and he only won 54% of his points in his career. You know, so that's 46 points that he lost, and yet the perception is that he won everything, right? He was unbeatable. So it'd be interesting to kind of look at the stats really within cricket and England cricket. You know, how many sort of overs are they winning? How many sessions are they winning? You know, how many days are they winning in a test match? But as we know, you can win a game. You can win a game in a session. You can lose a game in a session. So it's those fine margins really at that highest level that sort of exposes you. And I think they're being exposed at the moment. You know, probably against good sides. They might not be familiarising themselves in environments that they're playing in, with Champions Trophy, and maybe they didn't practice enough or didn't get used to the pace of the wickets enough, etc. But maybe they're not drilling hard enough. But and maybe Stokesy is probably looser in that environment, you know, than Owen Morgan was, right? I don't know. I'm not in the dressing room, but you kind of you're looking for reasons, aren't you, in performance sport, of why people do well and don't do well. And I think their cycle will come back and they will do well, but it kind of needs some stronger characters to step up and demand that of each other and hold each other accountable for those performances, which, you know, I'm hoping is happening.
But surely at the top level, like, you can use the 100 and the blast and the T20 stuff as the real entertainment side of things, I think, and that's where you're going to get people really into it. But ultimately, at international level, sure, you can be as entertaining as you like. Ultimately, it's a results business, right? It's great. Yeah, it's great watching us be bowled out for 150 in 16 overs, but if they keep losing, you know, Bazball was brilliant when it came in because we beat New Zealand, we beat India. You know, if we lose at home to India and then get stuffed overseas in Australia, Brendan McCullum will lose his job, you know, and it's all well and good Stokesy coming out saying, well, we're entertaining, but people don't care if we're losing 5-0 in Australia. So at some point you've got to, you know, look at like the New Zealand side. I wouldn't say on paper or when you watch them they're the most enthralling, you know, in terms of excitement, but they're very good and they win games. And as a cricket fan, you surely appreciate good quality cricket over Phil Salt going in and being out in the first over for 9 every game or 4 balls. surely there has to be a line where it said, well, we want you to be entertaining, but winning and results is ultimately what we want more than being crash bang wallop.
Yeah, look, agree, Chris. I think you kind of, like I said, you've got to look into the culture of that dressing room, right? What is the mantra in there? It's like, a quick 20 is fine. Don't worry about it. You're going to get picked for the next game. Or is it, do people feel like they're playing for their place? Do people feel a real pride in playing for their country? Do they understand? And I'm sure they do, right? And I'm sure if any of those players are watching this, they'd be horrified that that's even being questioned, right? But it's an easy assumption to make watching that they don't, right? Because are they really putting enough into it? Do they really care enough? And I think that's what upsets the spectator, right? Is that you're out there, you're representing your country, and if we had that chance, if we had that opportunity, we wouldn't be giving our wicket away, or we wouldn't be we wouldn't making some of the decisions that you're making, or we'd be trying harder, or we'd be training twice as hard as you are. So there's some optics around that they need to be aware of, and I hope that within that environment, they are aware of that, and also working towards sort of changing that, because the optics aren't great at the moment.
I think a perfect prime example of that would be someone like Joe Root, right? He's obviously going to. The Indian people watching might disagree, but there's a good chance that he could go past Tendulkar in terms of international Test match runs. It's certainly not impossible, but when McCullum came in, I think he tried to adopt this Bazball style approach, and he actually went for a bit of a slump of form. I think he went for a little patch where he wasn't as consistent, and he's obviously got hold of himself, or someone's got hold of him and said, "You're just go out there and score loads of runs." And I think if you actually then looked in the last sort of year and a half, his record has gone back through the roof because he's just batting like he always used to. He obviously played that ramp, I think, in the first over of the day against India, was against Bumrah, and got absolutely slated for, and rightly so. It was one of the worst pieces of cricket I've ever seen in my life, and this is from our best ever player. But he's put that away again and gone out and proved that you don't have to get a 60-ball 100. You can get 100, and even in the one-day tournament recently, right? He's come back in, and he nearly won us that game against Australia, or whoever it was when we chased Afghanistan, because he got a very good 100, and you don't have to get 100 of 70 balls, and that surely is, and he's probably our most gifted player. So other people coming in, and you just like to see a little bit more. As I said, I don't think there's any doubt that these guys love playing for their country, but a little bit more. Go and face 100 balls and get yourself 80, not 40 balls and get yourself 70. Like, it's one of those things that a little bit more grit and determination is surely what we want to see sometimes.
Yeah, and look, I'm going back a long time now, but I remember playing against Australia 3 times, and we played against them. I think it was 2001. I think I did pretty well in that match, but I remember going out there as a pretty average first-class cricketer, bowling against Hayden, Gilchrist, Warne was playing that match. Damien Martin was playing in that match, and just immediately thinking, that I'm struggling to even put any kind of pressure on these guys, because just the aura that they were giving around them was that, they're in control of the situation. They're not going to get out. They're deciding where the ball's going to go. They're deciding the pace of the game. And, if you're going to create a chance, it was just really, really difficult. Like, the hardest thing that you could do was create a chance. With where England are right now, I think bowlers are going out there thinking, look, we're going to go for a 4, we're going to go for a 6, but they will give us chances. They will give us chances. There's no doubt about that. It's up to us to sort of take them. And that's not a good psychological place for us to be as a side. That we're known as kind of weak in that sense, right? That we're going to we'll try and hit our way out of problems, and hopefully Joe, he shows that kind of way, and good sides. You mentioned New Zealand before, have that balance. They have people that are attackers. They have people that can change the dynamics of a game, but they'll have players that just knuckle in there and just work through that problem and work through those pressure points. And then, and again, cricket is all about reversing pressure. If you're trying to put the pressure back on the opposition all the time either through patience, or strength, then you might not be scoring, but you're winning that sort of psychological battle. And my predecessor, Richard Illingworth, was a great proponent of that. Just reverse the pressure all the time, put it on them. If you're not passing the bat, doesn't matter. Just make sure they don't score. Just strangle them as much as you can. And again, sides are doing that to us now at the England level, and we don't have that patience.
From a going back to like a management point of view, or a cricket CEO point of view, Rob Key did an interview last week and was pretty scathing about some of the England antics and some of the what they're talking about online or on social media or whatever it is. When you were CEO of Worcester and the coach and the players played in a certain way, I mean, you had a decent period. We heard about that earlier about winning things, but from a club point of view, from a managerial point of view, how much interaction would you have with them? How much is Rob Key, the managing director of England Cricket, how much is he talking to McCullum, the coach, about what you're doing here? Started off being great, and you talk about entertainment, but we're losing every game. We got knocked out the tournament, played 3, lost 3, lost to Afghanistan, relative minnows. This is not great, Brendan. Brendan's got a great coaching CV and started off brilliantly. Where does that awkward conversation come in, Matt? Worcestershire had lost, hypothetically, Worcestershire had lost 10 games in a row, playing abysmally. Nobody was coming to watch. The blast figures were way down. When do you come in as the person that answers to everything for the club? Finances, accountants, treasurer, everything. When do you come in and say, can we have a chat, mate? When does that?
I think if you're going to sort of follow what I think would be a good leadership model, is that you're kind of always there. When you're doing well, you're not distanced from it. You're not trying to interfere. You're not trying to take credit. I think when you're in leadership roles, your job is to make other people successful and then be accountable when they fail, right? So, if I can give some, experience in this. So we went through sort of periods where we did well. We went through, periods that we didn't do well. And, Kevin Sharp was head coach at the time, and we put then Alex Gidman, who was running the one-day setup, in charge of the whole setup, right? Because we weren't doing particularly well in red ball cricket. So, Rob is ultimately accountable, and they will be looking at him. What are you going to do next? It's not, are you going to change the structure? Are you going to stick with Brendan? Because ultimately the question doesn't come, is Brendan successful? Ultimately, then the question comes, is Rob the right guy for this job? Is he strong enough to kind of make the tough decisions? But bearing in mind that, you're trying to get that balance right between, giving the people that pick the team, that train the team, that where they stay, what they do, what their schedule is, what they eat, how long they stay out, if there's a curfew, what is set. You're trying to give them enough movement and freedom to be able to sort of do their jobs and run that environment in the way that they want to. You don't want to micromanage people, but they'll be definitely having those conversations, and he'll be definitely saying, look, things have to change, and if you're not going to change them, I'm going to change them. So if you want to kind of stick with this, then ultimately you will be hoisted by your own petard, right? It'll be you are the person that is accountable for this. So you've got to sort it out. And you've got to, if you tell me the issues, if you've got issues in the dressing room, if you've got strong characters that you're not sure about, if you've got leadership issues in the dressing room, then do something about it, or we can help to work together to kind of address that themselves. So no doubt that'll be happening, and that should be happening, and it should also be happening when you're winning as well, right? What can you do to improve? What can you do to sustain this for a longer period of time? You want to understand as a leader what is making us successful. Not just we're on a good run. So I'm sure that will be happening. And again, as a good leader, you're always trying to be involved as much as you kind of need to be, just to understand the culture in the dressing room. And that's why Rob is a good guy for that job, because he's been there, he understands it. And I think I had a unique perspective as a CEO of a first-class county because I knew what a good dressing room should feel like, and I knew what a bad dressing room and a toxic dressing room could feel like. And I think it's important that you have people in those roles that know what that have been in that environment and know what they're doing.
It's incredibly interesting to listen to all that, because as cricket fans, we don't know, we don't know what goes on, and we're all wondering. I watched the Women's Ashes hoping that England would do well, and they got thumped 16-0 in their format. Like, and you just think, well, there's all this holler for full-time central contracts and bigger and better pay, and the results are getting worse. How does that work? All these players now are on central contracts. They've got the you'd assume the best training facilities at Loughborough. They've got access to all this information. They've got an entourage traveling with a team of whatever you can shake a stick at. Nutritionist, strength and conditioning coach, mental psychologist, whatever they have to have. They drew the last series over here. They've won series in the past, and they got thumped 16-0. We're giving them more and more and more, and the results have gone off the end of a cliff. The general supporter, like me, is asking questions like, Matt, you're the CEO of Worcester. What's going on? We're chucking more money at these people. You've got the best training facilities, and we just got thumped.
No, I think the people that are close to that environment will know the answer to that, right? And we're not close to that environment. But what I would say to comment on that, and I've said this many times and it's applicable to lots of different sports. There's a fine line between confidence and arrogance. You want to be confident. You want to go out there. You want to know that you're better than your opposition, your opposite number, and you want to compete, and you want to believe in yourself. Once you step across that line into arrogance, you become ignorant, and you think you're better than you are, and you get complacent, and you don't try as hard because you're living off your reputation rather than your results. And it could be that there's certain people in that environment that have moved from confident to arrogant, and they've lost track, right? They've become complacent. And again, I can almost hear the screaming if anybody's watching that in that environment. They say, no, we're not. But you don't know that you are, right? And again, I know there was sort of issues around commentary and access, and ex-players and these sorts of things were questioning the fitness of the team and these sorts of things, right? If that's being even mentioned, even on a sideline conversation, then it's probably true, right? So, I think there's obviously a skill level in cricket, there's an attitude level, and there's a fitness level. So you need to be competing at all three. So there is no excuses around why players aren't fit enough. There is no excuses why there's sort of psychological kind of support in there. It basically comes down to them performing on the field, and if they're not, then it's up to the management of that team to make those changes, like we were talking about before, and then it's the management above those coaches to make those changes to make sure that environment changes. And I'm sure, if there hasn't been already and it's not been publicised, there probably will be. There's going to be repercussions for that, right? Because again, if that was a men's side, can you imagine? And so there needs to be fundamental change there.
It's coming up, isn't it? Like as Chris mentioned earlier on, that this year we've got a 5-test series against India at home, which is massive for the ECB and for raising money and also in terms of where we are in the game. And then we go to Australia for the Ashes. So it probably can't get a bigger year, and they're not going into it in great form, England. So it's a pretty big year for all of those people we talked about, coach and CEO and everything to do with the ECB. So we'll have to watch and support as usual, and hope and go to Lords and hope to see some great games and some good results. But ultimately, I think we'll have to wait and see what happens with these people and have confidence that they're dealing with it behind the scenes. Look, Matt, I found it absolutely phenomenally interesting hour and a quarter. We've kept you way too long. Thanks very much for joining. Really appreciate your time, matey. Good luck with the new job. We didn't even get onto the new job much, which we'll get you back on and talk about. Have another hour later on. Really appreciate your time, mate. Good luck with the new job, and we'll catch up soon. And thanks again for joining. Thanks to our sponsors, Phantom, Kentish Mortgage Company, Savills, for supporting. Thanks to everyone for watching, and the loads of questions in the chat. Sorry if I didn't get to them. Good to see you, matey.
No, it's been an absolute pleasure, and for those watching, thanks for sticking with me. It's been great to be part of it.
Chris, anything from you before we go?
No, I've obviously just enjoyed listening as much as anything. Usually can't keep me quiet, as Carl knows, but no, I find it really interesting, sort of the ins and outs of how things work. So no, I just really appreciate it, and yeah, it'd be good to get you back on soon, I'm sure.
It's a great perspective to get the from the other side of the table. We're all cricketers. You were a cricketer yourself, Matt. So you've obviously got both sides of the table about being a fan and also running the club. So it's invaluable, and I find it interesting to speak to you anyway. But to get a perspective on the administrator's role, and you've got this windfall coming in. So thanks again, matey. Really appreciate it, and look forward to catching up soon.
All right, take care, guys.
Cheers, both.
See you, everyone. Have a good one.
Bye. See you.
Bye.